Okay, I think we're live and ready to start. I had to grab one last Kleenex. My studio is cold and dusty, and so my nose is running a bit, but we are ready to go. And I want to welcome you to our lesson on painting larger. I'm excited to be going over this topic with you, even though, as always, I don't know that I'm the best person to advise you on this. Working larger for me is a little bit of a roller coaster, and so it's a little unpredictable. We're going to talk about that. And first of all, I just want to welcome you, my Fearless Artist community. This is an exclusive lesson to my Fearless Artists who are members in our community. And that's really special for me because it means that I can talk to you really frankly and honestly. We really do feel like a family, and because we have the same mindset. We're here because we're seeking this to create deeper work, work that is really authentic to who we are. We want to be heart-led artists, guided by our own instincts and intuition. We want to express who we are in our art and really show ourselves in our work, and that's really really powerful. In fact, I want to show you something, and I posted it in the community earlier this morning, and it's going to be difficult because it's not a very big file here, but I was going through my studio, or through just my books. Actually, I have this pile of books, and I had some notes there because I'd like to write a book on the topic of being a fearless artist. I think it's my 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road kind of thing. I don't think I'm ready to write it yet. I still feel like I'm really digging into this topic. There's so much to learn, and learning how to express and share it with you in a way that will impact your work powerfully. But I found these notes that I'd made, and I really liked it because it's just a little list of characteristics that define a fearless artist. And so I'm writing a blog post on it. I'll be sharing that down the road later this month, as we think about mindset and how it affects our work. And so first of all, it was just really fun to make this list. I don't know that it's in order of importance or anything like that. I just started writing ideas on what characteristics make up a fearless artist, and the ideas just kept coming out. A fearless artist is patient. They recognize the lifelong journey. We're forgiving. We don't completely abandon all hope of being artists. When we make a mistake, we don't see it as an attack on our identity. Fearless artist is vulnerable. We're showing who we are in our work, and that's a very scary thing. The art that scares you the most, that feels the riskiest to share, is often your most personal work. Fearless artists are imperfect. We recognize, I'm not very good at this. And that photo showed my feet. There we go. Fearless artist is willing to recognize that they are never going to make a perfect piece of artwork. That this idea of having a gift for art is kind of a myth. We have to build skill. We're going to make mistakes. It's okay. And accepting that and knowing it's okay to make mistakes actually eliminates that fear of the blank page, or at least makes it much smaller. Fearless artists are hardworking. We recognize that there's a big difference between 0, doing nothing, and 1, actually painting. And so we don't procrastinate. We get in there and we paint and recognize that we're still learning, even if our way of, I often felt like I wasn't a very good academic learner of painting. I tended to want to play instead of, study and follow the rules of watercolor. And it was really freeing to realize I was still learning in that process. The fearless artist is self-caring. We recognize that there's a big difference between the cost of art supplies and the value that creating art brings in our lives. And value is much more important. The fact that we are taking time for self-care, that we are contributing to our mental health, investing in our mental health through creating art. That's much more important than whether or not, we wasted a piece of paper. Fearless artist is insightful. We look at what's holding us back and we challenge those things. We seek to repeat and really fertilize and grow the things that propel us forward. We seek mentors, not gurus, and this is the idea that nobody's going to just tell you this is what you do and then you'll succeed. We look for people who are modeling the kind of artists we want to be. but aren't in that position to just, lecture us from their high mountaintop. I love being a instructor who is a peer with you. I'm a fellow watercolor learner just like you, and so we are in this journey together. I love the idea of a fearless artist being determined. I will get to that place of growth because I refuse to give up. I'm too stubborn to quit. Fearless artist is trusting. We trust that in all of this process of painting and making mistakes and painting again, we will grow and become our own favorite artist. Fearless artists are fun-loving. We want to work from a place of love and playful experimentation. We're seekers. We're relentlessly curious. We're looking at art that is different than ours, and we're exploring the world, and we're thinking about ideas. And we're welcoming ideas. We're not just, stuck in our safe little corner. Fearless artists are reflective. We look back, we celebrate how far we've come, and we're long-term and forward-looking. We recognize that our artistic journey is about more than any one painting. All of those paintings kind of link together in that chain of our journey. And we're open to change. We recognize that course correction is pretty much par for the course. We set out, we have this goal, and we might be halfway there and realize that we actually are more interested in moving in a different direction, and recognize that that's okay. So those are a few things that I think define a fearless artist. It was really fun to find this list, which I think I wrote 6 months to a year ago, and it was just jotting down, and it was fun to find it again and think about how all of those characteristics, I want to see those in my life, and in varying degrees, and share them with you. So I'd love to hear what you think about that. Feel free to comment on it on the post in the Fearless Artist community. That's all there. And so that was just something that inspired me today. Just looking at the chat here, I want to encourage you to feel free to ask questions during the broadcast. Robin is here to kind of keep track of them and get them written down so we don't miss anything. So we're going to be talking about working larger, but if you have other things you want to ask about, that's welcome to happen as well. There was a little bit of talk in the chat about our book club. Basically, every couple of months we look at a different book on art or creative mindset. Feel free to recommend books that have inspired you, just and talk about anything you're reading anytime. I'm a huge reader. I don't know if you know this, but I cannot remember a time in my life when I didn't know how to read. My parents sent me to school because I was at kindergarten at 4 because I was reading already. And so I was ready. And I've always it's been one of my favorite things to do. And so I'm still devouring books at the rate of several a week usually. And all of those books, I don't remember everything I read, but I have this wonderful collection of art books in my studio that inspire me. I like reading fiction, nonfiction, and all kinds of stuff. And the Tao of Watercolor is written by Jeannie Carbonetti. This is our book club book for the month. And if you don't have a copy, you can find them on Kindle or from your local library. This book has been around for a while. I think it's been 1998. So yeah, it's been 20 years since she wrote this book. What I really liked in this book, because when it comes to a watercolor artist, I choose styles that resonate with me. This particular Jeannie Carbonetti, I don't love her painting style for some reason. I think it's just a little more unfinished than I like. At the same time, I like looking at it because it shows just that beautiful freedom of being your own heart-led artist, showing who you are. And these paintings, Jeannie Carbonetti's paintings, show us who she is. And then her words in the book show us also how her mindset guides her work. And that was, to me, really powerful as I was reading. As I was reading the book, I kept underlining sections. I'm going to get a little bit... we'll talk about it in the community as well, but I just wanted to comment. In the introduction, she talks about the primary goal of painting being a special attitude or spirit, an intention of self-knowledge above all else, which turns the painting into meditation and meditation into art. She talks about Narcissus looking into a pool of water, which the story, the myth about Narcissus was actually a negative thing. He stared into the water so long he turned to stone or something. He turned into a flower, I think. He just never got up because he was so fascinated with his own beauty. And but what Jeannie Carbonetti is saying is we can gaze into the world of our paintings and see our own reflection. See the paintings show who we are, and a side of ourselves that's often hidden from view. And she says, like Narcissus, our hearts too will melt into flowers as we come to see the truth, as he did, that what we have longed for we already have, that what we are already is beautiful. And I just absolutely love that story, and I love it for a couple of reasons. And one is that I'm from a Christian background. I grew up in the church and still am. But as a young person, often we were taught that we were full of sin, basically, and that's an ugly thing. So everything inside of us, unless we had God in our lives, was just ugly and dark. And I've learned over the years. I think for one thing, as a kid, you mishear stuff, and it's not that everybody was always harping on our absolute evilness all the time, but everything was very black and white. And what I've realized, of course, is that we can't. I'm a person made by God, and if God made me, then he doesn't make anything that's ugly and black. And so every person is beautiful. And in creating art, we look really deep into finding that. And so that's just a little bit of my own personal background and what I was taught and what I've worked through over the years. And in art, in making paintings, I've gotten to see that there's incredible beauty inside of me that I get to express. And we are raised in a culture that we get shamed for our bodies. We get shamed or we have to put on social masks to fit in with other people. And, we get shamed for having political views that differ with what's popular, or we get shamed for, there's just a lot of things that we feel like, I can't talk about this with that person, and I can't be this kind of person with these people. And I have to show, one face to my mom and one face to my friends. And in art, we want to let go of all of that. And I think that's why painting from the heart is so hard, because we're trained to, have those social masks and always be filtering everything we say and do and think. And we don't have to do that in our paintings. We are learning how to let go of all of those shoulds and coulds and identity things and just show the beautiful person that we were made to be. And wherever you're at spiritually, and we don't have to go there, but I really think that we should all deeply believe that we were made beautiful. We were beautifully made. There's intention in our lives. There's beautiful things that we get to share from our hearts. And let's let go of all this stuff that says we need to hide, and we get to share that in our paintings. So that's my little sermon for the day. We're going to move over to talking about painting larger. And Ellen has a question, and I think it's a good one to answer right now. Who would you say Jeannie is based on her artwork? I've heard that our work shows others who we are, so it sparked my curiosity. And what I see in Jeannie's work is beautiful peace and very, very much this willingness to be meditative. Of course, we see her love for color, but I just feel like, you don't feel, it's not that I see, here's a person who loves dogs and shoes or whatever, or long walks on the beach. But what we see instead is mindset. We see a heart. And so we see someone who's a lover of beauty, who has learned how to tap into an inner well of peace. And, those are things that we get to see. Often with new painters, what I see in your work is anxiety and doubt. And that is revealed in the way you move your brushes and so forth. So just something to think about is, that mindset does come out. So yeah, it's kind of fun to be able to look for that in your students' work. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, we're going to go take a look at my notes on painting larger, and then we'll move over to the work surface and I'll do a little demonstration as well. So I wrote some notes because this is going to be a blog post in future later this month as well. You guys get to hear the expanded version, which may or may not be a good thing. With watercolor, it's interesting because I've been getting these questions. How do I transition to working larger, to painting bigger paintings? And first of all, how do we define working bigger? When we're working in watercolor, a large painting for a watercolor artist, like the biggest sheet of watercolor paper, the biggest standard sheet of watercolor paper is a full sheet. It's 22 by 30 inches. And I'm not sure if you can see it behind me. Let's see here. Yeah, behind me, this one here, voila, this one, is a full sheet of watercolor paper. It's 22 by 30 inches. That is as big as watercolor tends to get. And so when we talk about working larger, we might be talking about sizing up to a full sheet. If you've been painting, postcard size, maybe for you it's just sizing up to a quarter sheet, which is 11 by 15 inches, and that's okay. What's interesting is that for a watercolor artist, what we would consider large is not what's considered large by an oil or acrylic painter. Often they're starting with an average size painting being 24 by 36 inches, so 2 feet by 3 feet, which is a good size. Excuse me, sneezing. Okay. I was going to mute the microphone, but that sneeze snuck up on me really fast. So we tend to, so what I've found is that I've had large paintings and I've brought them to the art gallery to a group show, and I'll hang it on the wall and they'll bring in art from other artists. And the one time my painting, I think I had like a 12-inch square painting, and that was a reasonable average size for a watercolor painting. Well, they put it beside this fellow's painting that was like 6 feet tall by 2 feet wide, and no one saw my painting. It was almost like it was invisible on the wall, and his painting was like red and black and dark, and yeah, I don't know who hung that show, but my painting was just lost. Nobody saw it because his was just so big and dramatic. And so we do have this little battle to fight in finding ways for our paintings to draw the eye. And I kind of like that because we actually end up with the watercolor having this kind of hidden beauty. And for me, my paintings are often about hidden beauty, about noticing beautiful things in those small moments of life. So I kind of think it's a neat parallel that sometimes that happens for my paintings when they're in a gallery, is that they don't get noticed right away. It takes that discerning eye to kind of stumble upon those small, beautiful watercolor paintings and value and enjoy them. Watercolor supplies tend to be scaled for smaller size paintings. So when we're talking about painting in a full sheet or larger, often it can be hard to find materials, brushes that scale up to that size. I found that a lot of the larger brushes that I've tried out for watercolor tend to just not feel right. They're really too heavy or clunky, or they just, they're too soft or floppy or too stiff. So finding just the right brush to then size up has been a challenge for me. And then palettes tend to have small wells that don't accommodate a large brush well either. So those are all reasons why you might see more small watercolor paintings than large ones. And I think that's okay. Small paintings do matter. A painting's monetary value might increase as the size increases because artists tend to price at least partly by size. But a painting's significance is not hinging on its size. I have seen many highly esteemed watercolor artists who are winning awards for small paintings. Linda Kemp, one of my favorite artists, and she's transitioned to acrylic now, but when she was painting in watercolor, her paintings tended to be about 11 inches square, 11 inches on both sides, sorry. And she was winning awards and writing books and, being quite esteemed, building her reputation on these beautiful small paintings. So before you start painting larger, I would encourage you to think about why you want to do that. If you think that it's going to make your work more important or more valuable, I would pull back and just reevaluate maybe how you define a worthy painting. Painting larger does not automatically make your paintings better. And it's actually a lot like... This just makes me laugh. If you're a young girl and you've got this boyfriend and he seems like he's drifting away, getting married is not going to solve your problems. If you have relationship issues when you're dating, they're just going to feel bigger if you're married to this person. So painting larger is a lot like that too. If you're struggling with certain watercolor approaches or techniques or styles in painting smaller, is not going to be solved by painting larger. You bring those problems with you, and likely they're going to become larger as you scale up. So that's just something to think about as you think about why you might want to start painting larger. Now, there are some good reasons to paint larger, and I think we could talk about those. For one, we get a greater range of movement. I used to paint small with my board on my lap, and so my movements were very cramped. As I sat and my board was on my lap, and my my movements just couldn't be large because of that. And as I started scaling up and I started standing to paint, and I almost always stand when I'm painting now, I found I had a greater range of movement. I could make much more expressive strokes. I can move my brush with my whole body behind it, kind of like Tai Chi with paint. I also find that when I scale up and paint larger, I do grow my skills. In fact, I have to almost approach it like I'm learning a new medium. Everything has to change because working larger affects so many aspects of painting. It affects how you're going to handle your brush. It's going to affect how long it takes things to dry. And your composition changes as well as you paint larger. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. Mistakes are also more visible on a larger painting. So learning how to simplify and express yourself is even more important. And I find that painting larger is pretty exciting. When I paint larger, the sense of risk feels greater, and painting larger dares me to be bolder and more fearless. So I do enjoy painting larger for some of those reasons. Now, the one I can tell you what not to do. I used to grab a full sheet of watercolor paper as soon as I started thinking of a new subject to paint. I had this picture in my mind of the next thing I wanted to paint. I wanted to make this masterpiece that was big and expressive and expansive. And I was just sure I had that, next masterpiece just ready to put on that full sheet of paper. And I ruined so many watercolor sheets of watercolor paper that way because I would dive in without any preparation. And those failures taught me to slow down. To scale back my expectations, and to start by exploring my new subject in a smaller size, to work out my plans with some studies and sketches before I ever attack that full sheet masterpiece. On my website at learn.angelafair.com, you Fearless Artist members have access to my spring runoff painting series. It's a little course that I made. It's not even really a course. It's just kind of a look at my own journey to painting larger on a particular topic. And if you want to see how I stretch my paper on stretcher bars to make a really big, bigger than a full sheet of paper surface to paint on, there's instructions on that there. And a look at that whole process of developing an idea small and then sizing up. And so you can take a look at that. That's the runoff series at learn.angelafair.com, and I'm sure Robin has already found the link and thrown it up on the chat there. We'll put it in the comments for the video as well. So I have learned to pull back and just do a little more planning before I start painting on a full sheet of watercolor paper. I have started painting a few paintings that are even larger than a full sheet because you can buy watercolor paper in rolls. I think my roll is 42 inches wide by 10 yards long. So it's a big piece of paper, and I can make really big paintings that way. Now I find that having a roll of paper is a little awkward. It's very awkward to cut that paper down to size. You have to unroll it, and you have to make sure your surface is clean as you roll it out. I usually have to roll it out on the floor or clear this whole table off to get it opened up so I can cut it down to size. Sometimes I have to starfish to hold the corners in place so that I can cut it, and so it's quite the workout. And then once it's cut, I have to find a way to support it, because a big piece of paper like that, it's 140-pound weight. And so it's going to buckle a lot once it gets wet. And so usually I stretch it over stretcher bars. Again, the tutorial for that's in the Runoff series. And then once it's over those stretcher bars, it dries nice and tight. I have a support, and also it's actually ready to hang once I'm done painting. As it just has to be sealed. And so I've done that a few times, and I thought I'd show you just one of those here. It's behind me, so I'll just see if I can't get the camera to point at that. There we go. This guy right here is about 3 feet by 4 feet. And it's also in my Runoff series. But it doesn't look like this, and I'm going to talk about that. Put my stool back so I can continue talking to you. So that big painting actually took me months to finish because I started it in the Runoff series. You'll see me stretching the paper. You'll see me putting the first layer of paint down. And when it was done, I felt like I had something that was kind of good, but it just wasn't resonating. Again, the authentic artist needs the work to resonate and kind of hit you in the heart. And so I decided that what I was going to do was throw more paint at it and challenge my fear of overworking by just adding a lot of color and paint to this paper. And I had so much fun doing it, and I'm quite happy with the results. But it took me challenging that, well, this is kind of good enough, but it doesn't really, make me feel like, yes, this is who I am. So it really was kind of a real journey, giving myself permission to take some time, to take a few months to develop that piece and not just rush into it or feel like a failure because that first layer wasn't saying everything I needed it to say. Yeah, so there's that. Just pausing for a second. Yes, Robin's got the links up there, and so that you can take a look for that. With okay, so with painting larger, and I want to encourage you. This is something you can do. It is something you should do if you're feeling that urge. Again, this is not about making more important paintings. We want to learn how, I guess, going back to that whole analogy, the relationship analogy, if you're not enjoying the painting process, painting smaller paintings, painting larger will very likely not solve that. So spend some time, excuse me. So I would encourage you, rather than scaling up your paintings, if you're struggling to find joy in your process, spend some time working on your mindset, your inner artist, as you learn to make the process of painting more meaningful and fulfilling. We're going to just move over to my work surface here, and I'm going to find a cough drop because I have a tickle. My dad has a tickly throat, and I inherited it from him. Okay, so it only comes out when we're talking in public. Okay, so I have 2 pieces of paper here. I've got this little guy. I've got this little guy because we're going to scale up, but we're going to do it on video size. So now we're going to have some fun with this. So I have this tiny little piece of paper, and ordinarily I probably would never paint this small, except for artist trading cards are about this size, and they're a lot of fun to do. And the other thing I have here is this little bouquet of sunflowers because I could not resist it when I saw it at the grocery store. I mean, how cute is that? It just feels like fall, doesn't it? So we're gonna move it because I think my camera will have a hard time focusing on it, knowing what to focus on if I have it in the picture. Excuse me. But if I try to paint this bouquet on this piece of paper, I'm going to be forced to simplify greatly. This is just some Nicolaizo yellow. And so I'm looking to channel those pointy little petals and find some of those browns maybe. And I could use, actually I like a violet for flowers, sunflower centers, but we're going to start with some hematite. I think actually, because that's a nice, yeah, this is hematite violet, so it's a brown, but it's a violet, if that makes sense. It doesn't, but so we're going to throw some of that in, and we're going to throw in some green. I don't know which green I want. We'll use sap green, and we find our leaves. And we have a lot of, I mean, we have some limitations with this size. We cannot put in the intricate and fine details unless you were one of those artists who was really willing to work with like a magnifying glass. And there's some amazing artists who do like penny-sized paintings in great detail. They're quite remarkable. I'm going to add a tiny bit of cobalt teal just to kind of suggest the vase down here. And I love spinning this palette. It's like when you're a kid and you take piano lessons and you have one of those round stools. Super fun. Okay, this is manganese violet. I just can't resist adding a tiny bit of violet into my flowers here and letting that mingle with the brown a bit. And once this is dry, I mean, I could add some details, and I could add a little bit of, you know, orange around to indicate some individual petals or some shadows near the center of the flower. And so basically what we have is very abstracted. Again, and once it's dry, put in some line work to kind of define the flowers a little bit, but we're limited as to how much detail we can show. Sizing up means we have to change our plan a little bit. Now, first of all, what you might be seeing here is a common mistake that we make when we do additional versions of a painting. One thing that I often find is we might be studying a scene and painting it, and then we decide to size up, but we fail to take into account proportion. So maybe I size up my paper, but I don't realize that the second piece of paper I've chosen, that larger sheet, is actually a little bit longer than this little piece, which is almost square. And that will change my composition dramatically. What works in this size might work as it's scaled up painting, but it might not work when we start elongating the width or making it taller or just changing those proportions in some way. So you want to really be careful if you're sizing up and you want to stay fairly close to that original composition. Make sure your proportions are proportionate to the original version. And one thing I'll do is just use rather than tear the paper, because sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of a border on the end. You can test out colors that way, which is kind of nice. So I might just add a piece of tape. Hopefully I'll place it straightly. And that will give me those proportions, you know, a little more accurately. So we'll set that over there. And then now the next issue is detail. And oh, I didn't mention the orange robin. Sorry, it's Aussie red gold. So sizing up now for this next version, and I'm being very loose on these sunflowers. I'm not thinking of any particular sunflowers. Like I'm not painting this flower exactly. I'm just kind of looking at the overall shapes and patterns that I see. And immediately here, if I try to paint the exact same thing again, well, first of all, that would mean this one has 1, 2, 3 petal points here, and then kind of this 1.5, and then this fourth one. So already I've messed up because this is 1, 2, 3, kind of one and a blob, and it's not filling the space the same way. So suddenly the things that worked, if I was being really precise, they're not going to work the same once we've enlarged the painting. We need to suddenly start thinking, how do we fill those larger shapes? Because as a small shape, we can keep it very, very simplified. But as a large shape, suddenly it starts to matter whether or not everything is, or how much detail you put in, I guess. We need to not just scale up our sizes, but it's very possible that you're going to need to add more detail, or just make sure those scaled up elements are much more impactful. These three little petals here are very much the same. They're almost clones of each other, which doesn't matter in this tiny painting. But if I had three exactly the same petals in a line here, it would be so much more obvious because my painting is bigger. And so suddenly that little mistake wasn't really a mistake in the smaller version, but it's sure going to be a struggle in the larger. So we have to think about that. Now I'm also struggling here already because we have this dark area which might be 2 flower centers. I feel like it's 2 flower centers. But over here I'm trying to make 1 flower center work, and it's not really working very well. But boy, that hematite violet is really beautiful. So I like that. Let's pull that Nicolazo yellow over a little bit closer. So we have to then say, well, I can use the basic composition, the basic shape here, which is this kind of curving mass of yellow, but I also need to approach this like a brand new painting. I cannot copy by rote and just make it larger to make it work. The other reason I can't do that is because the authenticity of my painting would suffer. When we paint something for the very first time, or I don't know if the first time is right, but when we paint something like this loosely and it's working, if we're trying to do it exactly the second time, are we as loose as we were the first time? Absolutely not, because we're trying to copy. So we cannot think that by copying we will capture the same spirit and mood of the original painting. So I'm already diverting my plan, diverting myself to make this painting echo some of the things that are working in this one. The colors are working, the overall shape, but I cannot assume that just placing everything in exactly the same spot is going to work. And so I kind of like that. Let's put another dark up here. But I am treating this as its own painting. This is a suggestion, gives me a little bit of a guideline, but it cannot be a blueprint. My husband's a builder. Their goal is to make everything just like the blueprint. Especially if you're contracted out to someone, you can't just improvise based on your own feelings or what you think might be good. You have to do what the engineer wants or what the customer wants. And okay, here's another example. These leaf shapes are very simplified. Here, we need them to be a little more interesting and dynamic in order for them to really beautifully balance out the painting. And so I'm going to place my greens in a similar position to the original. But again, I need to make those shapes just a little more compelling because the size is greater. The shape needs to be on point as well. I don't know if on point's the right word, but I like that cobalt teal for suggesting the vase. I'm going to do it again. Let some of that color flow. Drop in some sap green to suggest some leaves. And continually pulling back to evaluate what's working, how is it like this one, how does it need to be different. I cannot paint the same thing no matter how beautiful and compelling this is, and I can't tell you how many times I've painted a tiny painting that was just absolutely beautiful, and I cannot replicate it in a larger size. It has, every painting is new and has never been painted before. No matter how good our blueprint is, we're not that kind of artist. To be heart led means your work is needing to be original in some way every time, and that's kind of how it works for me. I don't know if spatter would have worked on a tiny painting, because maybe it would have felt too chunky and blocky for a smaller painting. I'm not sure. I'm going to put a little more dark up here and see if that doesn't work. To suggest, and again, I'm trying to keep that loose freshness without getting tight and constricted, and while still adding an element of additional detail. And it's a challenge. It's already I'm seeing a few things that I probably should have done differently. It's a little bit top heavy right now, so maybe I need to hint at more greens in the background here. I don't really want to, so I'm going to avoid it for now. And this is just a demonstration piece talking about how I would develop a small painting to a larger one. It takes often multiple attempts to really get that process figured out. I'm adding a little bit of the manganese violet again. This manganese violet, you're not going to find it on Daniel Smith's color charts. It's made by Schmincke, and I just love it. And apparently I didn't turn my phone sound off. I apologize for that. What I'm enjoying in this experiment is just the little shapes that are being made with those darks, and it's kind of a weird, kind of clunky pattern of darks here. I really do watch my darks and how they move through the painting, because it really impacts your focal point and the visual pathways that the viewer experiences as they look at your art. I've been using the word focal point to describe to talk about composition, but I'd actually like to start using the phrase visual pathway more, because we never just look at one thing in a painting. Ooh, that's the focal point, I'm going to look at that. No, our eye travels through the painting, and we want to keep that in mind as we plan, what does the viewer see first? Where does their eye go next? Is there an area where they're bouncing back and forth because there's not a good hierarchy of what's the important thing to look at? We look for those things. And visual pathway just makes more sense than focal point. You're still going to have an area that's probably that you want to be your focal point, where the eye maybe spends a little more time and rests, but the visual pathway is equally important. Oh, I like that one little Aussie red gold brush mark to suggest a petal. And I didn't need to do that in this one. I mean, there's a lot of softness here, but over here, I feel like I need a little bit more in terms of edges to create, to make this painting kind of work. And those little orange little dots are actually really affecting that visual pathway that we talked about. Look at how we can, by placing those little dots of orange, guide the eye right through the painting, right? Just like that. And maybe a little bit of spatter. Suddenly I'm feeling better about this, and I'm kind of glad I didn't just quit and say, oh, well, it's getting really top heavy, and it's still a kind of top heavy. This is still kind of a big blank space. Every time I paint, when I'm scaling up and I think I know what I'm going to do and I have original studies and plans, when I go to the next painting, I recognize and I try to really remember it's a new painting every time. I'm not copying. what I had on this paper. I'm using it, it's my jumping off point, but I have to be willing to be led by what this painting needs. And when I do that, that's when my painting comes together and starts to show who I am, and keeps that original freshness that was probably what motivated me to want to do a larger version. But I can't keep that freshness by copying. So that's just something to keep in mind. I'm kind of going to stop. I really like this in a lot of ways. Those little pops of orange brought it all together for me. Again, that visual pathway. There's a lot of puddles of water here that might dry into hideous watermarks. We're going to have to take that risk because I don't really want to blot them away. And the other thing that might happen is once this is dry, I might choose to crop. Maybe it will seem more balanced if I take the bottom inch out, or I think if I moved in and cut off this kind of 1.5 inches on this side, I think that actually might balance it better. And I'm always willing to crop my painting to make it more dynamic. Of course, it's easy to do now because you can take a picture with your camera and then just crop it in a photo editing program. Try different variations to see what works the best. And I often do that. I'm not afraid to cut away excess in order to make the painting shine even more. I'm not losing anything by doing that. In fact, I gain in impact, so that's important to me. Okay, so yeah, Christy, you're asking about making sure the frame was right at the bottom of the vase. Again, I just have to crop it and kind of see where it all goes for me, and how I feel about it as it dries. And I wish you could see up close the beautiful details in this painting. They're just some really pretty textures. It kind of looks like a big blobby mess on the cameras on the screen of the computer, but I'm kind of happy with the blobby mess on the paper on the table here, seeing it in life. So hopefully that makes sense. I just want to look at my notes one more time, and feel free to ask your questions here. So here's my I think I've got 6 tips here for you regarding sizing up. Number 1 is just adjust your expectations. Plan to approach sizing up almost as though you were starting fresh in a brand new medium. It's not just, oh, I'm going bigger. It's almost like you're starting over in watercolor. Be okay with that, and recognize that it's probably going to feel really awkward and uncomfortable to size up. Number 2 is scale up your supplies. And this is a little bit of a tricky thing. It's very hard to paint loosely and make bigger strokes if you're using the same small brush you used for that 8 by 10 inch painting. You can't make the same brush strokes on bigger paper with that small brush. You'd almost have to double or triple your brush strokes in order to get the same shape in proportion. So you want to try working with larger brushes, working with more paint in your palette, and working with maybe a little more water as well. The deal with that is it can be hard to find a larger brush that feels really good to your hands. So take your time on that as well. When I'm painting larger, I often end up using my same favorite Escoda Versatil number 10 rigger. It is the biggest rigger that they make, and so I have to use it. But then in doing that, in sticking with that same brush that I use most of the time, I have to recognize that I have to use it a little bit differently. I have to I have to move more in order to fill the paper, and that can lead to fussier, busier paintings. It's a really good time. Sizing up is a really good time to try fresh paint. You need to fresh paint squeezed from the tube gives you more paint at your disposal, gives you a richer saturation of color, but it also uses your paint up really fast. So keep that in mind, and just enjoy working with those brighter saturations of color. Let that be your time to really get a feel for color and value. It's a whole new painting, so it's a good idea to plan your first large painting as a larger version of a successful smaller painting. But even with this as your starting point, just as I've demonstrated, be prepared for detours and a feeling of foreignness. What works as a small painting doesn't always work for a large painting. A small area in a small painting, an area of quiet space might read as a gaping blank hole in a larger version. So you have to plan to tune yourself to the new painting and allow it to guide you. Number 5, failures are okay. I mentioned that in this large painting that I showed you, it came from that full sheet painting in my runoff series. I'd worked it out in at least a dozen small studies, and when I tried to go really large, it just felt off. That challenge, I use that as a challenge rather than letting it shape my identity as just can't paint large. And it was really freeing to use that painting to challenge my mental obstacles, my mental fear of overworking by adding tons of paint and pushing my boundaries. Finally, when you're working larger, we have a new challenge in the form of framing and finishing our paintings. Watercolor is a fragile medium. We're painting on paper, and we're painting with materials that can't handle a ton of sunlight, that if they get wet, that disturbs the paint. So watercolor is traditionally framed under glass. Of course, when your painting is under glass and it's a full sheet, that's a really big painting. It's a really big frame to transport. There's just that much more risk of damage or breaking glass. I've started mounting my larger paintings on wooden panel. There is a tutorial for that on YouTube. Or putting them on the stretcher bars like I talked about. That has made painting larger more affordable for me. And I feel like mounting my paintings on a panel rather than putting them behind glass makes my art more approachable, which I think is awesome. Why would I want the viewer to feel a barrier between themselves and the work? Glass has reflections and stuff, and so it makes it feel just a little more distanced from the viewer. And I wonder if that's not one reason why watercolor has struggled to really be taken seriously as a medium, is you really just can't get that closer connection and relationship that you might get when you're standing in front of an oil painting and seeing the texture of all the brush strokes. So I love being able to mount my work on panel or on the stretcher bars, wax it to seal it, and that gives a much more approachable and contemporary feeling. I think my number one piece of advice for anyone who's wanting to paint larger is going to be the same advice that I give for all areas of painting. Be patient, trust the process, and have fun. Trust that whatever's coming off your brush is teaching you and guiding you to be your own favorite artist. Even if you decide painting larger is not for me, I've done 10 paintings and they just aren't coming together, or I've done 20 or 50, and you want to go back to small, that's okay. What you'll learn as you work larger will inform and strengthen your smaller paintings as well. You can have confidence in that. We get better because we just don't quit. We're too stubborn to quit, and we learn something with every painting that we do. So those are my thoughts on painting larger, and we can discuss them more in the group as well. Christy's asking, does the wax protect against UV? Any info on the wax? The wax I'm using is Dorland's wax medium, and it is a beeswax and resin compound. I don't use UV glass in framing my paintings. I'm too cheap. Mostly what I've found is my paintings framed under glass. I take them into art shows. I don't sell a lot of work out of galleries and art galleries. So I've very often, if I've taken a painting to 2 or 3 shows, the glass will get chipped in transport, and so I'm not going to pay for UV glass when I often have to replace that glass before it ever leaves my collection. So I don't know if that makes sense. I really do think the beeswax is a great option, and I think it should give an equal I can't speak to that, but Dorland's should have some information on their data sheets that they have for their product. Helen's commented she doesn't think panels come big enough for really large paintings. I actually get my panels custom made when it comes to getting specific sizes done. The art supply stores that I've seen, they'll carry panels in a variety of sizes because they are used for oil and acrylic paintings. There are a number of artists who prefer wooden panels to canvas. And so you can find them online or in art supply stores. But, excuse me, when it comes to very specific sizes, I have had mine custom made. There was a carpenter in the area who used to do it for me, and he's retired. And I found a Canadian source that I used. They're pretty expensive, especially because I have to pay shipping. So if you are a fortunate person who lives in an area where stuff like that is readily available, you should go for it and give it a try. Again, I think because mounting on panel is such a new thing, I mean, it's really only in the last handful of years that people have started doing it. So there's not a lot of data on the longevity of it. And there are people who mistrust, are very concerned with archival quality. There are artists who are very strong on always use UV glass. Always, I'm trying to think. They're very never use paints that might be marked as fugitive or not light fast, things like that. There are some people who are very strict on that, and they're probably not going to be comfortable with mounting their paintings on panel. For myself, the paintings I've done, and I've been using this process for probably about 3 years now, I'm really liking the process. I'm liking what I see there, and I'm so far I haven't seen any long-term issues with maybe the painting coming loose from the surface or anything like that. If I've done it properly, it looks great from the first time I mount it and wax it, and it's lasted really well. And yeah, people do. And Robin's popped up Dorland's data sheet on their wax. So they're a great person to ask, a great company to ask if you have specific questions about it. They can let you know their recommendations for using the beeswax. I usually use 2 coats to cover my painting, and then it cures and hardens over time, over a day or 2, and looks great. What I like about that, rather than just using a varnish, is that it protects, or it keeps the integrity of the watercolor. If you're using a varnish, most varnishes are going to add a bit of a sheen to your painting, and then it doesn't feel as much like a watercolor. And using a matte varnish, a lot of times they're matte because they've put in like some kind of a chalky powder or something, so then it's not as it actually gives kind of a film over the painting, and I don't really want that. So by using the wax, what I'll do is I'll seal it with a Krylon spray, and Ellen's just commented there's a Krylon fixative that offers UV protection, and I think that's the one I use. It's just sitting over here. I'm trying to read the label. So you can take a look at Krylon's website and see what they say about UV protection. Usually what I'll do is I'll spray the painting with the Krylon spray that seals it from any disturbance of the pigment when I'm rubbing the wax on. And the wax smells amazing. It feels really fun and tactile to rub it in, and you can buff it to a shiny finish or just lightly buff so it still looks like paper but is protected. So I think that's pretty cool. Nancy, that's a great comment. Nancy says, I use Dorlands as well, and I've had much better interest in sales since I started mounting my paintings a year ago. So that's pretty cool. I'm not the only person who talks about mounting paintings on panel. Another artist that you can take a look at is Sandrine Pellissier. I'll try to write her name in the comments here and spell it, because I don't know if my pronunciation is good. And I think that's it. It might have 2 S's. And she has a tutorial. I got my information originally when I started thinking about mounting on panel. I used her tutorial, and then I adapted it to suit my own purpose, because I don't think she uses the wax. But the way she sticks it to the panel and seals it is really beautiful. Ellen comments, I have experience with encaustic, and it has incredible archival properties. You can also use it over watercolor. And I love the idea of pairing encaustic and watercolor. I think that's really exciting. I have this huge block of beeswax, and I tried actually melting it onto one of my paintings once. I don't have a good... It's around here somewhere. It didn't really turn out great, so I still need to explore that idea further one day when I'm feeling playful. So there's that. It's all in personal preference and what you want to play with next. And there's no law that says I will forever mount my paintings on panel or never use glass again. I still do frame under glass. There's no I don't know. There's just I want to have freedom to kind of explore and play and learn as I go. And I love that by not having to use glass over my paintings, you know, it just gives you that opportunity to get right up close and personal and really feel that texture. It's the next best thing to actually painting, right? So hopefully that helps. Robin, I'm not sure if it was a video. I don't think it's on YouTube. I think it was just a blog post, so maybe that will help you find it. Yeah. It's been a while, and she has courses and stuff, so you know she might have pulled it off, and now it's part of a paid course or something. I'm not sure. Uh, I think we're at an hour, so if you have any more questions, feel free to pop them in right now. I'm taking off on Sunday. I'm heading east with my girls and my mom, actually. We're going to head to Montreal, where I'm teaching a workshop there. And looking forward to meeting a bunch of students in Montreal and then another group of students in Ontario at the Singing Waters Retreat Center. Our moderator, Evelyn Vanderland, will be there. She's going to be helping to host. And so I'm looking forward to meeting her in person. And we've been emailing for a couple of years now, so it'll be so great to meet in person, as well as all of the students who have registered to come from all over the place. And so that's what's on my list for the next 2 weeks or so. Robin found that Sandrine's lesson there, so she's popped that up in the chat as well. So I'm going to be away. I'll be trying to pop into the Fearless Artist community from time to time to say hi and let you know what we're doing as we travel. Because I'm bringing my daughters and my mom, we're going to hopefully do some sightseeing and see some. I actually lived in Ontario for about a year and a half as a kid, and I have some very fond memories of the area kind of near the retreat center. So I'm looking forward to kind of exploring that with my girls. And so that's going to be a lot of fun. In the meantime, we are again continuing our book club. I want to encourage you, as you paint this month, really just focus on the process. Focus on making your artistic journey as much fun as possible. I love Ellen's comment here. I used to worry a lot about archivability, but really it's just fun to make art. I try to always use professional material, but otherwise I just create. I know some artists in my area who do not worry about archivability at all. There's one artist, trying to remember her name now, Tina Martell, and she made some stuff out of paper. She made it was like a truck out of paper, and then I don't know, she set it on fire or it got destroyed by weather. I can't remember how it all went down, but you know, there's performance art and these non-permanent art sculptors and artists that make things that are not intended to last forever. And here we're sitting here as watercolor artists, all obsessed with trying to make our work as archival or as long-lasting as an oil or acrylic painting. We don't have to do that. Let's enjoy our art. Let's let it live as long as it can. And then let's let it go. We don't have to grip it with those clenched fists. I think of people who do sandcastle art. Or make those little rock sculptures that you find when you're out hiking, and those found art things that are just so cool. Peter von Tiesenhausen is an amazing artist from this area, hugely respected, and he does like these birch bark things and wood sculptures, and he leaves them out in the weather in the forest, and sometimes he'll burn some parts of them and stuff like that, and that's stuff that's not meant to last, and it's not for him. It's not about archivability. He gets to show who he is, make his statement about the world and what he thinks about it, and then let it go, release it. And I think that's just part of creating art is releasing it, giving it permission to live its best life. And for art, sometimes for watercolor, maybe that means colors age a little bit, or the paper yellows a bit, or the sunlight, maybe you hit it out of sunlight, but it still got enough that it faded a bit, and that's okay too. Robin found the Tina Martell video. That's awesome. She teaches at the college about an hour and a half away. I haven't actually officially met her yet. I'm a little intimidated actually by artists who are really conceptual. But I love the idea of creating and then just open hands. We're not clenched on so tight, worrying about, are people going to respect what I do? Is my art going to survive, into the future to inform the world? It doesn't have to matter. We just get to create it and say, here it is. This is who I am, and I want to share it with you, this moment in my life. And isn't that just fun to be able to have that privilege to do that? Well, I think so. Okay, we're going to wrap up and say goodbye for today. Thanks for being here and being a part of the community. The things that you contribute inspire me. And lately I've felt like I've just got these floodgates opening of thoughts and writings on creative mindset. And so much of that comes from your comments and your feedback, you sharing your own process. And it encourages and inspires me and gives me insight into how I can encourage and inspire you. So thank you. Have a great day. I wish you well as you head towards a weekend, hopefully with some time to be creative. I'm going to turn away from here now and go pack my suitcase for our workshop. And I'm really looking forward to that, because when I teach, I learn new things that I can then share with my community. So you'll be hearing about the little inspiration moments that come out of the workshop. They'll be informing future lessons this fall as well. So bye for now, Robin. Thank you for moderating. We'll see you all soon. And I completely forgot to find the off button. Moving over to that. Okay, there we go. Bye for now.